The drone feed flickered across the screen, showing dense purple forests and mountains that pierced the clouds. David Reynolds leaned closer, watching something move between the trees, something massive. "Pause that," he said quietly. Now, the expedition's chief researcher tapped the controls with his scaled fingers. The image froze. A creature the size of an earth elephant stood partially visible through the vegetation. 6 legs, each ending in claws that looked sharp enough to tear through steel. Crystalline spines ran along its back, catching the light of the planet's twin suns. "Riftclaw," Nalth said, his voice tight. "The locals call them that because they can tear rifts in solid rock." David studied the frozen image. The creature's head was turned slightly, one eye visible. That eye looked intelligent, too intelligent for a simple predator. "How many have we counted?" Petra asked from her station. The younger Soltharian seemed nervous, her tail wrapped tight around her chair leg. 17 in this territory alone," Nalth replied. "Probably more we haven't seen. They're the apex predator on this world. Nothing hunts them. They hunt everything else." David watched the replay again. The Riftclaw moved with purpose, not the random wandering of an animal searching for food. It stopped at certain points, seemed to mark them somehow. Then it looked up, directly at where the drone hovered. "It sees the drone," David said. "Impossible. The drones are too small, too high," Nalth said. David zoomed in on the creature's eye. "Look at the pupil dilation. It's tracking movement. And see there on its head. Those aren't just decorative ridges. I think they're sensory organs." Nalth's scales rippled, a Soltharian sign of discomfort. "Which makes them more dangerous. I'm implementing Protocol 7. No landing, no direct observation, drones only, and they stay above 3,000 meters. "That's excessive," David said carefully. "We're here to study the planet's ecosystem. The Riftclaws are the dominant species. We need more data." "We need to stay alive," Nalth countered. His voice carried the weight of command. "I've seen what apex predators do. My people learned that lesson thousands of years ago. You don't approach them, you don't interact with them, you observe from safety or you don't observe at all." David wanted to argue but held back. The Soltharians had evolved as prey animals. Their instincts screamed danger whenever they encountered something with teeth and claws. It made them careful, which was good for research. But it also made them blind to certain possibilities. He pulled up another drone file, this one from 2 days ago. 3 Riftclaws moving in coordination, driving a herd of grazing animals toward a cliff. The hunt was complex, requiring timing and communication. "They're pack hunters," David said, playing the footage. "See how they position themselves? That's strategy, and that call the leader makes. The others respond to it immediately. That's language or something close to it." Petra drifted over to watch. "The frontal lobe structure in the skull scans we took. It's larger than expected for a predator this size." "Stop," Nalth said sharply. "Both of you stop. I know what you're thinking. You're seeing patterns and assuming intelligence. It's a trap. Predators are clever, yes, they have to be to hunt, but clever is not the same as sapient. These creatures are dangerous. That's all we need to know." David sat back. He'd had this argument before on other worlds. The galaxy was full of species that had climbed to civilization from prey-animal roots. They dominated the councils, the research institutes, the exploration fleets, and they all shared the same blind spot. They feared predators so deeply that they couldn't imagine them as anything other than monsters. Humans were different. Earth had produced both prey and predator species, but humans themselves sat somewhere in between. They'd been hunters once, persistent predators who ran their prey to exhaustion. But they'd also been hunted, forced to develop tools and cooperation to survive. It gave them a unique perspective. "I'm not saying we approach them," David said. "I'm saying we should study them more carefully. Intelligence can evolve in different forms. Just because they have claws doesn't mean they can't think." Nalth's tail lashed once. "My decision stands. Protocol 7. The horizon's edge maintains orbital position. All observation remains remote. And if anyone on this crew violates that protocol, they'll be confined to quarters for the remainder of the expedition. Am I clear?" Clear, David said. Petra nodded reluctantly. David turned back to his screen as Nowth returned to the command area. He pulled up the footage again, watching the Riftclaw that had spotted their drone. The creature stared upward for a long moment, then made a sound. A rumbling call that the audio sensors barely caught. 3 more Riftclaws emerged from the forest, looking up at the same spot. They were communicating about the drone. They were teaching each other. David made a note in his private log. The Soltharians had protocols born from millions of years of evolution. Those protocols kept them safe. But sometimes safety meant missing something important. He watched the Riftclaws gather below, their crystalline spines glinting. One of them picked up a rock and threw it. The throw fell short by hundreds of meters, but the intent was clear. They didn't like being watched. David smiled slightly. That was another sign of intelligence, privacy, awareness of being observed. These creatures weren't just clever hunters, they were something more. But convincing Nowth of that would be impossible. The chief researcher saw only danger. His species had spent too long running from things with teeth to ever see them as potential equals. The Riftclaws dispersed back into the forest, moving as a coordinated group. David tracked them until the canopy hid them completely. "Run deep scan on Sector 7, he said to the computer. "I want geological surveys, water sources, and territorial markers." "Acknowledged," the computer replied. Petra glanced over. "What are you thinking?" "Just being thorough," David said. But that wasn't entirely true. He was thinking about patterns, about intelligence hiding behind claws and fangs, about how wrong it felt to observe from orbit when something down there might be worth talking to. The screen showed empty forest now. The Riftclaws had vanished completely, as if they'd never been there. David had a feeling they were still watching, though, still aware of the ship above them. Still waiting. The warning lights turned everything red. David grabbed his seat as the horizon's edge shuddered violently. Through the viewport, he saw the planet's atmosphere rushing up to meet them. "Solar flare hit the shields," Petra shouted over the alarms. "Main power is offline, auxiliary can't hold us." Nowth worked the controls frantically, his scales pale with stress. "Trying to level out, we need to find flat ground." There, David pointed to a clearing visible through the clouds, 2 kilometers ahead. The ship groaned as Nowth adjusted their trajectory. They weren't flying anymore. They were falling with barely any control. The forest canopy grew closer. David could see individual trees now, their purple leaves spreading like welcoming arms. The impact threw everyone forward against their restraints. Metal screamed. Something exploded in the engine compartment. Then silence, broken only by the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the plink of cooling metal. David's hands shook as he unclipped his harness. Everyone alive. "Barely," Petra groaned. She had a cut above her eye, green blood trickling down her face. Nowth climbed out of his chair, favoring his left leg. "Damage report, now." David checked his console. Most of it was dead, but backup systems flickered to life. "Hull breach in sections 4 and 6, sealed automatically. Main engines are gone. Communication array is completely destroyed. Life support is running on emergency power." "How long?" Nowth asked. 4 days, maybe 5 if we're careful." Petra pulled up external cameras. The view made David's stomach drop. They'd crashed in a valley surrounded by rocky hills. And circling those hills, moving between the shadows, were Riftclaws, at least a dozen of them. Their crystalline spines caught the fading sunlight as they watched the crashed ship. "We're in their territory," Petra whispered. Nowth limped to the viewport. His whole body went rigid when he saw the creatures. "Full lockdown, seal every door, no one goes outside, we wait for rescue." "Rescue might take weeks," David said. "The nearest ship is 3 systems away. Without the communication array, they don't even know we crashed." "Then we wait weeks," Nowth snapped. "Inside where we're safe." David looked at the Riftclaws again. They moved with careful precision, never taking their eyes off the ship. But they weren't attacking. They were observing just like the ship had observed them. The first night passed slowly. David took inventory while Petra worked on repairing the communication system. Nalth stayed at the viewport watching the rift claws. They never left. They took turns, some sleeping while others kept watch. "They're planning something," Nalth muttered, "waiting for us to make a mistake." David didn't think so. The creatures showed too much caution, too much organization. If they wanted to attack, they would have already. The hull was breached in 2 places. A determined assault would break through. On the second day, something changed. The Riftclaw pack had been circling at a distance, but now they pulled back. All except one. A smaller creature, maybe 2/3 the size of the adults. It limped toward the ship, favoring its front left leg. "Juvenile," David said, watching through the camera, "and it's hurt." The young Riftclaw made it 20 meters from the ship before collapsing. It tried to stand, failed, and lay there breathing hard. The adult Riftclaws watched from the hillside but didn't approach. "They've abandoned it," Petra said softly. Nalth nodded. "Natural selection, the weak die, the strong survive. It's how predators operate." David frowned. The adults weren't leaving. They stayed positioned around the valley, watching both the ship and the injured juvenile. "I don't think they've abandoned it." "Then what are they doing?" David studied the scene, the way the adults held their positions, the way they looked from the juvenile to the ship and back again. "I think they're waiting to see what we'll do." "We do nothing," Nalth said firmly. "Protocol 7 still applies, more so now. We're vulnerable. We don't give them any reason to attack." The juvenile tried to stand again. It managed to get up on its 5 good legs, but the injured one couldn't bear weight. When it tried to walk, it stumbled and fell. A sound came from its throat, somewhere between a whimper and a growl. David watched the adults. One of them, a large female with a scarred face, took a single step forward, then stopped, waiting. "It's a test," David said quietly. "What?" Nalth turned to him. "They're testing us. The juvenile is injured but not dying. The pack could help it, but they're choosing not to. They want to see how we respond to a wounded creature." "That's insane," Nalth said. "You're attributing complex reasoning to animals." "Am I?" David pulled up his research files. "Watch this." He played footage from 3 days ago before the crash. A Riftclaw pack working together to build something. They'd arranged rocks in a specific pattern near a water source, not for hunting, for communication. "They make markers," David said. "They teach their young, they use tools. On Earth we had dolphins, elephants, great apes, all showed signs of culture, of intelligence beyond simple survival. These creatures are showing the same signs." Petra leaned in. "If you're right, then leaving the juvenile to suffer is cruel." "If I'm wrong, going outside is suicide." David countered, "But I don't think I'm wrong." He stood up. "No," Nalth said immediately. "Absolutely not. I forbid it. You're the expedition leader. I respect that. But I'm the xenobiologist, and this is my call. That creature out there is suffering. If the pack is intelligent, helping it could establish communication. If they're not, then I'll retreat back to the ship. But I have to try." "You'll die," Nalth said flatly. "Maybe, or maybe I'll prove that we've been wrong about predators. That intelligence isn't exclusive to species that evolved as prey." David moved to the emergency locker and pulled out a medical kit. He also grabbed a ration pack and a portable scanner. His hands were steady now, his fear replaced by something else. Certainty. "If I don't come back," he said, "tell the rescue team what happened. Tell them I chose this." "David, please," Petra said. "Think about this." He was thinking about it. He'd been thinking about it since they'd arrived at this planet. About the patterns he'd seen. About the intelligence hiding behind fangs and claws. David walked to the airlock. Nalth moved to block him, but David was taller, stronger. He gently pushed past the Soltharian researcher. "I'm sorry," David said, "but some things are worth the risk." The airlock door opened. The planet's air rushed in, warm and filled with strange scents. David stepped through. The door sealed behind him. Through the porthole, he could see Nalth and Petra watching, their faces frozen in horror. David took a breath and started walking toward the injured Riftclaw. On the hillside, every adult predator turned to watch him. The scarred female took another step forward. Her crystalline spines began to glow faintly. David kept walking, his heart hammering in his chest. This was either the bravest or stupidest thing he'd ever done. He was about to find out which. 20 meters felt like 20 kilometers. David walked slowly, keeping his hands visible. The injured Riftclaw watched him approach, its body tense. Up close, the creature was even more impressive. Its crystalline spines refracted light into rainbow patterns. Each claw was as long as David's forearm. The juvenile made a sound, low and rumbling, a warning. David stopped 3 meters away and sat down, cross-legged, non-threatening. He placed the medical kit and food pack on the ground between them. Then he waited. Minutes passed, the sun moved. Across the sky, on the hillside, the adult Riftclaws remained motionless, watching. Inside the ship, Nalth and Petra would be losing their minds. David kept his breathing steady, his posture relaxed. The juvenile's eyes never left him. They were amber-colored with vertical pupils that dilated and contracted as it studied him. David could see the intelligence there, the calculation. This creature was making decisions, weighing options. "I'm not going to hurt you," David said softly. His voice seemed loud in the quiet valley. "I know you can't understand me, but tone matters, right? You can hear that I'm not aggressive." The Riftclaw tilted its head slightly. One ear, small and tucked against its skull, swiveled toward him. David smiled. "Yeah, you hear me, and you're listening. That's good." He reached slowly for the food pack. The juvenile tensed, spines rattling. David froze, then continued at an even slower pace. He opened the pack and took out a ration bar. Standard protein mix, designed to be palatable to most carbon-based life forms. He broke off a piece and placed it on the ground. Then he slid it forward, stopping it halfway between them. The Riftclaw stared at the food, its nostrils flared, scenting it. David could see the conflict in its body language. Hunger versus caution, need versus instinct. 2 hours passed. David's legs went numb. The twin suns climbed higher, making the valley hot. Sweat ran down his back. He didn't move. The meditation techniques he'd learned as a kid came back to him. Breathe, be still, become part of the landscape. The juvenile shifted. Its injured leg dragged as it moved closer. 1 meter, half a meter. It stretched its neck out, teeth bared, and snatched the food. Then it retreated quickly, making a chittering sound. David let out a slow breath, first barrier broken. He placed another piece of food down. This time the Riftclaw approached faster. It ate while watching him, ready to bolt if he moved wrong. David stayed perfectly still. By the time the suns reached their peak, the juvenile had eaten 6 pieces. It was closer now, less than a meter away. David could see the wound on its leg clearly, a deep gash probably from a fight or a fall. The skin around it was inflamed. "That needs treating," David said quietly. "Going to get infected otherwise, and I don't think your friends up there will help if it does." The Riftclaw made a sound, not aggressive. Almost questioning. David reached for the medical kit. The creature tensed but didn't retreat. He opened it slowly, showing each item as he removed it. Wound cleanser, antibacterial gel, synthetic skin patch. "See, nothing dangerous, just medicine. We use it on ourselves when we get hurt." He demonstrated by rubbing some gel on his own arm, where he'd scraped it during the crash. The Riftclaw watched intently, its eyes tracking every movement. David held out his hand, palm up, empty, unthreatening. "Can I see your leg?" The juvenile looked at his hand, then at its injured leg, then back at David. Something passed through its eyes, a decision. It extended the wounded leg toward him. David's heart raced. This was trust, actual, genuine trust. He moved slowly, telegraphing every action. His fingers touched the creature's scales. They were warm, surprisingly smooth. The Riftclaw flinched but held still. "Good," David murmured. "You're doing great." He cleaned the wound carefully. The juvenile made small sounds of discomfort but didn't pull away. David applied the antibacterial gel, then covered it with the synthetic skin patch. The patch would dissolve in a few days, but by then the wound should be healing. There, David said, all done. The Riftclaw pulled its leg back and examined it. It flexed the leg, testing. The patch held. It looked at David and something changed in its expression. Recognition, understanding. A deep rumble echoed across the valley. David looked up. The scarred female was moving down the hillside, not running, walking with deliberate steps. The other adults followed her. David's blood ran cold. This was it. Either he'd made a breakthrough or he'd just signed his death warrant. The pack leader approached slowly. She was massive, nearly twice the size of the juvenile. Scars crisscrossed her body, evidence of countless battles. Her crystalline spines glowed brighter than the others, casting patterns on the ground. She stopped 2 meters from David. Her eyes bore into him, intelligent and ancient. David held his breath. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to remain still. The leader lowered her head, not a threat display, something else. She rumbled again, a complex sound with multiple tones. Then she turned to the juvenile and made a different sound, gentler. The juvenile responded, its voice higher-pitched but similar in pattern. They were talking, actually communicating with language. The leader looked back at David. She took 1 step closer. David could smell her now, a sharp scent like ozone and copper. She extended her head toward him. David understood. Slowly, carefully, he reached out his hand. His fingers touched her scaled snout. She was warm, her breath hot against his palm. For a long moment they stayed like that. Human and apex predator, 2 species meeting across an impossible divide. Then she pulled back. She made a sound to the rest of the pack. One by one they approached the juvenile, touching it gently with their snouts and forelimbs. A reunion, a welcome back. The leader turned away and began walking toward the hillside. The pack followed. The juvenile hesitated, looking between David and the departing pack. It made a sound, almost questioning. "Go on," David said. "They're your family." The juvenile touched its snout to David's hand briefly. Then it limped after the pack, moving better now with the treated leg. David watched them disappear into the forest. His whole body was shaking. Relief, awe, wonder. He just communicated with an alien apex predator, not through force or dominance, but through compassion and patience. Behind him, the airlock opened. Petra ran out, followed by a limping Nalth. "You're alive," Petra gasped. "We thought they'd kill you." "They were never going to kill me," David said. His voice shook. "They were testing me, testing us, and I think we just passed." Nalth stared at the hillside where the pack had vanished. His scales had changed color, a sign of deep confusion. What just happened? "First contact," David said. "Real first contact, not with technology or words, with understanding." In the distance, a Riftclaw's call echoed through the valley. Others answered it. The sound was complex, layered with meaning David couldn't yet translate. But he would learn, because now he knew the truth. The galaxy had been wrong about apex predators. Intelligence wearing fangs and claws was still intelligence. And humanity, with their unique evolutionary history, might be the only species capable of recognizing it. 3 days had changed everything. David spent his mornings outside the ship now, and the Riftclaws no longer kept their distance. The juvenile he'd treated stayed close, watching his every move with curious amber eyes. Petra had started calling it Runner because of how it moved. Despite the healing leg, David sat on a flat rock, sketching patterns in the dirt. Runner crouched nearby, its attention fixed on the drawings. When David made a circle, Runner huffed. When he drew a triangle, Runner made a different sound, a clicking noise from the back of its throat. "You recognize shapes," David said, "and you're trying to tell me something about them." Runner extended 1 claw and drew in the dirt beside David's sketch. 3 lines meeting at angles, crude but deliberate, a triangle matching David's drawing. Inside the ship, Petra watched through the viewport. She'd been documenting everything, filling her research files with observations that would change xenobiology forever. Nalth watched too, though his reactions were harder to read. Fear and fascination seemed to war inside him. David pointed at the triangle, then at Runner. "You made this." Runner clicked again. It drew another shape, a circle this time. David laughed, not from humor but from sheer amazement. "You're learning from me, or teaching me, maybe both." The pack leader appeared from the forest, moving silently despite her size. David had started thinking of her as scarred. She'd earned it. This female had survived battles that would have killed most creatures. She carried herself with the confidence of absolute authority. Scarred approached the rock where David and Runner sat. She studied the drawings in the dirt, her eyes moving between the shapes. Then she did something that made David's breath catch. She drew her own shape, complex, multiple lines intersecting in a pattern that looked almost like a star. "That's a constellation," David whispered. He pulled out his portable scanner and called up a star map. The pattern matched, exactly. A constellation visible from this planet's surface. Scarred watched as he displayed the star map. Her spines glowed brighter. She made a deep sound, and 3 more rift claws emerged from the forest. They gathered around David's scanner, staring at the stars displayed on the screen. One of them touched the display with a careful claw. It pointed at a specific star, then looked at David. "You know the stars," David said. His mind raced with implications. "You've been studying them how long? Generations? Centuries?" Scarred made a gesture with her head, pointing toward the nearby hills. An invitation. David stood. "Petra, I'm going with them if I'm not back by dark." "Don't come looking, wait for rescue." "David, that's not funny." Petra's voice crackled through his communicator. "I'm not joking, this is too important to miss. Record everything I send you." He followed Scarred and the others into the forest. Runner limped alongside him, occasionally pressing against his leg as if offering reassurance. The trees grew thick here, their purple leaves creating patterns of shadow and light. They walked for an hour, climbing into the hills. Finally, Scarred stopped at the base of a cliff. She made a sound, and the others spread out. They began moving rocks that blocked a narrow opening. A cave, and from the way they moved the stones, this entrance had been deliberately hidden. Scarred entered first. David hesitated only a moment before following. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness. Then he saw the walls. They were covered in drawings, images carved and painted over what must have been hundreds of years. The oldest marks near the back were faded, barely visible. The newer ones toward the front were sharp and clear. David activated his scanner's light. The images became clearer. Riftclaws hunting, riftclaws in groups organized like communities, and above it all, covering the ceiling, stars, constellations mapped with incredible accuracy. But one section of wall made David stop completely. A figure drawn larger than the others, walking on 2 legs, reaching up toward the stars. And around this figure, riftclaws gathered, their crystalline spines glowing. "This is us," David breathed. "You drew humans, but how? We've never been here before." Scarred moved beside him. She touched the drawing, then touched David. Then she pointed upward at the constellation paintings. She made a complex series of sounds, almost like a story. David understood, or at least he understood enough. "You've seen ships before, other species coming, observing from orbit, then leaving. You've been watching the sky, waiting for someone who would come down, someone who would understand." Runner pressed against his leg, clicking softly. "The test," David said. "When I helped Runner, that wasn't random. You planned it. You wanted to see if we'd show compassion, if we'd risk ourselves for a hurt creature." Scarred made a sound that might have been agreement. She moved deeper into the cave, and David followed. The passage opened into a larger chamber. More drawings covered these walls, but these were different. They showed tools, crystals shaped into cutting implements, structures built from stone, plans for things not yet created. "You're not just intelligent," David said. "You're on the edge of civilization. You've developed art, astronomy, tool use. You're building towards something bigger, and you've been doing it alone because every other species that found your world saw only predators." Scarred turned to face him. In the dim light, her eyes glowed faintly. She made a long, complex vocalization. David couldn't understand the specific meaning, but the emotion was clear. Loneliness, hope, question. David pulled out his communicator. "Petra, are you getting this?" "Every second," she replied, her voice shaking. "David, this is unprecedented. They're not pre-sapient. They're fully intelligent. They've been waiting for contact." "For the right contact," David corrected. "They didn't trust the others, species that saw teeth and ran, but humans. We were hunters once. We remember what it means to be both predator and protector." He turned back to Scard. "We'll help you if you want it. No interference, no taking over, just communication, exchange of knowledge, friendship." Scard studied him for a long moment. Then she lowered her head in that gesture David was learning meant respect. Trust. She made a sound, and Runner responded immediately, moving to David's other side. "Runner stays with me?" David asked. Scard clicked once. Affirmative, Runner would be the bridge, the translator, the connection between their species. They left the cave as the suns began to set. David's mind swirled with everything he'd seen. The implications were staggering. An intelligent apex predator species developing culture in isolation. No prey species would have believed it possible. Their fear ran too deep. But humans had walked a different path. They'd climbed from predator to civilization, carrying both sides of that evolution with them. It made them capable of understanding what others couldn't. When they returned to the ship, Nalth was waiting outside. His expression was unreadable. "I saw the transmission," he said quietly. "The cave paintings, the star maps. I need to revise my report and my thinking." David nodded. "They're not animals, Nalth. They never were. They're people, different from us, but people." "People with claws," Nalth said, but there was less fear in his voice now. "The Galactic Council won't know what to do with this." "Then maybe it's time the Council learned," David replied. "The galaxy is full of prey species who made it to the stars, but there might be dozens of predator species like the Riftclaws developing intelligence alone because everyone else was too scared to look closely." Runner made a sound, pressing against David's leg, a reminder that the work was just beginning. Communication, understanding, building bridges across the vast gulf between species who should have been enemies but chose to be allies instead. The stars came out overhead, the same constellations the Riftclaws had painted. David looked up at them and smiled. The universe had just gotten a lot more interesting. The rescue ship arrived on the 8th day. David was outside with Runner and 3 other Riftclaws when the vessel descended through the clouds. It was larger than the horizon's edge, designed for recovery operations. The hull bore the markings of the Galactic Conservation Corps. "This could go badly," Petra said through the communicator. She stood beside Nalth at the viewport. "Conservation Corps has authority over Category 1 predator species." "The Riftclaws aren't Category 1, David replied. "They're sapient. That changes everything." The rescue ship landed 100 meters away. Its ramp extended, and a squad of armed personnel emerged. Leading them was Commander Triloth, an insectoid whose species had evolved from hive prey animals. His compound eyes swept the area, stopping on David and the Riftclaws beside him. "Dr. Reynolds," Triloth's voice buzzed through a translator. "Step away from the creatures, slowly." "They're not creatures, Commander. They're intelligent beings, sapient by every legal definition." Triloth's mandibles clicked in what might have been skepticism. "I've read the preliminary reports. Cave paintings and star watching don't equal sapience. Many animals show complex behavior. It doesn't make them people." Runner moved closer to David, sensing the tension. Scard emerged from the forest with the rest of the pack. They arranged themselves in a loose formation, not threatening but clearly protective. "See," Triloth gestured with one of his 4 arms. "Pack behavior, territorial displays, classic apex predator responses. Dr. Reynolds, you've gotten too close to dangerous animals. It happens to researchers. You start seeing what you want to see." David felt anger rise in his chest. I've documented tool use, symbolic representation, language structure, and astronomical knowledge. They have culture, art, history, everything that defines sapience. Or mimicry, Tryloth countered. Some species evolve to copy behaviors they observe. It's a survival mechanism. Nalth emerged from the horizon's edge, limping but determined. Commander, I'm the expedition leader. I was skeptical too, but the evidence is overwhelming. These beings meet every criterion for protected sapient status under galactic law. Tryloth's attention shifted to Nalth. A Soltharian defending predators? That's unusual. Truth is truth, regardless of my species' history, Nalth replied. These Riftclaws deserve proper first contact protocols, not a conservation categorization. Noted, Tryloth said. But until the Council reviews the evidence and makes an official determination, they remain classified as dangerous fauna. Standard protocol requires relocation away from crashed vessels and potential colonization sites. Relocation, David stepped forward. This is their world, their home. You can't just move them like animals. I can and will, Tryloth said. For their own safety and ours, my team will establish a containment perimeter. The Riftclaws will be moved to a preserve on the southern continent. It's for the best. Scard made a deep rumbling sound. The other Riftclaws responded, their spines beginning to glow. They understood the threat, even if they couldn't understand the words. Stand down, Tryloth ordered. His security team raised their weapons. Stun settings, but David knew those could be lethal to some species. Nobody had tested them on Riftclaws. Wait, David said. Just wait, let me show you something. Give me 5 minutes. Tryloth's mandibles clicked rapidly. 3 minutes. David turned to Scard. He pulled out his scanner and displayed the star map he'd recorded from the cave. Then he drew in the dirt the same triangle pattern Runner had shown him days ago. Scard watched. Then she drew too, not the triangle, something new, a complex series of lines and curves. David recognized it after a moment. It was a representation of the solar system, primitive but accurate. The planet they stood on, the twin suns, even the other planets in their orbits. Runner, David said. The juvenile approached. David pointed at the scanner, then at his own. Chest, human, David. Runner clicked. Then it touched the scanner with one claw and made a specific sound. A name, its name in Riftclaw language. David repeated the sound as best he could. Runner clicked again, seeming pleased. Then it pointed at Scard and made another sound, teaching David the names of the pack. Tryloth watched all this with unreadable insectoid eyes. Trained responses, he said, but his voice had less certainty. Then explain this, Petra called from the ship's ramp. She held up a data pad. I've been analyzing their vocalizations. They have syntactic structure, subject-verb-object organization, recursive grammar. That's not mimicry, that's language. I need to consult with the Council, Tryloth said. This requires higher authority. You do that, David said. But while you're consulting, remember something. The galaxy is dominated by prey species. Every council member evolved running from things with teeth. That creates bias, blindness. How many intelligent predator species have we overlooked because we were too scared to look closely? Tryloth was silent for a long moment. Around them, the Riftclaw pack waited. They'd positioned themselves strategically, David realized. Escape routes behind them. High ground on both flanks. They were ready to fight if necessary, but hoping it wouldn't be. That was another sign of intelligence, knowing when to fight and when to talk. Scard made a decision. She stepped forward directly toward Tryloth. Every weapon tracked her. David's heart stopped, but Scard didn't attack. She lowered her head in that gesture of respect. Then she did something remarkable. She drew in the dirt, the same drawing from the cave, a two-legged figure reaching toward the stars, but she added to it. Another figure shorter with multiple limbs. Standing beside the first figure, two species together looking upward. Tryloth stared at the drawing. His mandibles moved, but no sound came out. She's offering peace, David said quietly. Alliance. She's saying we can work together, but you have to be willing to see past the claws and fangs. Scard made a complex vocalization, long, layered with harmonics. It sounded almost like singing. One by one, the other rift-claws joined in, a chorus of voices, beautiful and alien. Runner pressed against David's leg. He rested his hand on the juvenile's head, feeling the warmth of its scales, the trust in how it leaned. Into his touch. "Your 3 minutes are up," David said to Tryloth. "But I think you need more time to really look at what's in front of you, time to question assumptions your species has held for millions of years." Tryloth lowered his weapons. His security team looked confused but followed suit. "I'm not authorized to make this determination," he said finally. "But I'm also not authorized to relocate a potentially sapient species without proper protocols. I'll need to file a formal inquiry. That means staying here, documenting everything, waiting for council observers." "How long?" Nelth asked. "Weeks, maybe months. The council moves slowly on matters this significant." David smiled. "We'll wait. The rift claws have waited for generations. A few more weeks won't matter. And maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something the galaxy needs. A chance to see past old fears, to recognize that intelligence comes in many forms." Scard ended her song. The pack fell silent. She looked at David, then at Tryloth, then back to David, waiting, patient. The universe held its breath. On this unnamed planet, under twin suns, two visions of civilization stood facing each other. One born from prey animals who'd learned to think their way to safety. The other from apex predators who'd learned compassion alongside strength. David didn't know if the galaxy was ready for this truth, but ready or not, change had arrived, and it had fangs. 6 months had passed. The valley was different now. The horizon's edge had been repaired and converted into a permanent research station. 2 additional buildings stood nearby, constructed with careful attention to the local environment. The Galactic Council had sent observers from 7 different species, though only 2 had been willing to work directly with the Riftclaws. David stood outside the main building, watching Runner lead a group of younger Riftclaws through a training exercise. The juvenile had grown in the past months, nearly reaching adult size. The leg injury had healed completely, leaving barely a scar. "They learn fast," Petra commented, joining him with 2 cups of coffee. "Too fast, some of the observers say. It makes them nervous." "Everything about this makes them nervous," David replied, accepting the coffee. "Half the council still wants to classify the Riftclaws as pre-sapient. They can't accept that predators might be as intelligent as prey species. But the evidence keeps mounting. Language analysis, mathematical reasoning, artistic expression. Even the skeptics are running out of arguments." David watched Scard approach from the forest. She'd become a regular visitor to the research station. Behind her walked 3 elders, Riftclaws even older than the pack leader. They carried something between them, wrapped in woven plant fibers. "Meeting time," David said. "You ready?" "I've been ready for months. Let's go make history." They met the Riftclaws halfway. Over the past months, David had learned enough of their language to communicate basic concepts. It was a slow process, but progress happened daily. Runner had proven to be an excellent translator, seeming to understand both human and Riftclaw perspectives instinctively. Scard made a greeting sound. David responded with the appropriate vocalization, still clumsy but improving. The pack leader's eyes showed something that might have been amusement. One of the elders stepped forward. This Riftclaw was ancient, his spines dulled with age, his scales marked by time. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and deeply curious. He made a complex series of sounds. Runner translated, using a combination of gesture and modified vocalizations that David could understand. The message was simple but profound. "We wish to show you the deep place, the place of beginnings." David exchanged glances with Petra. They'd been waiting for this. The Riftclaws had sacred sites they'd kept private, even from the humans they'd come to trust. An invitation to see them was a massive gesture. "We would be honored," David said. The journey took several hours. They traveled deep into the mountains, following paths that showed signs of being maintained over centuries. Other rift-claws joined them along the way, until more than 30 moved through the forest in a loose procession. Finally, they reached a cavern system far more extensive than the first cave David had seen. The entrance was guarded by two massive rift-claws, their spines bright with bioluminescence. They examined David and Petra carefully before allowing them to pass. Inside, the caverns opened into a vast underground chamber, and covering every surface were paintings, not crude drawings, but art, sophisticated images that told stories spanning what must have been thousands of years. The earliest paintings showed riftclaws as pure hunters. Simple pack dynamics, basic tool use. But as the timeline progressed across the walls, the images became more complex. Communities forming, structures being built, stars being mapped, knowledge being passed down through generations. And near the end of the timeline, near the newest section of wall, were the ships. Vessels from different species, arriving at the planet, observing from orbit, then leaving. Dozens of them over what looked like centuries. "They've been visited before," Petra whispered. "Many times, but nobody ever made contact." The eldest Riftclaw made a long vocalization. Runner translated haltingly. "They saw only teeth, only claws. They feared what we might be, so they never learned who we are." David approached the newest painting. It showed the crashed horizon's edge, and beside it a human figure sitting with an injured Riftclaw, the moment that changed everything. "You painted us," David said softly. Scarred moved to stand beside him. Through Runner's translation, she explained, "We painted hope. The pack that walks on two legs came from the sky. You carry teeth in your history, but wisdom in your heart. You understood what others could not." The elders began unwrapping the bundle they'd carried. Inside were crystals, carefully shaped and polished. They arranged them in a specific pattern on the cavern floor. A gift. "These represent stars," Runner explained. "The same stars in sky. Our ancestors watched them, tried to understand. We knew we were not alone. We waited for someone who would see us truly." David knelt beside the crystal arrangement. Each one had been carved with incredible precision. This wasn't primitive art. This was sophisticated craftsmanship. "You've been preparing for this for generations." "Longer," Runner confirmed. "Since first ship came, we knew someday someone would land, would meet us. We hoped they would be like you, patient, kind, willing to look past fear." Petra pulled out her recording equipment. "This changes everything. The Council can't ignore this. You're not just sapient. You've been conducting your own form of astronomical observation, developing technology within your cultural framework. You're already on the path to civilization." The eldest Riftclaw made another sound. This one needed no translation. It was the sound Scarred had made when David first touched her, that moment of connection across species. It meant understanding. Acceptance, family. They spent hours in the cavern, documenting everything while the Riftclaws shared their history. Stories passed down through generations. Knowledge preserved in art and song. A civilization built in isolation, waiting for the day when fear wouldn't separate them from the stars. As they prepared to leave, David turned to Scarred. "What happens now? The Council will eventually recognize you as sapient. That means first contact protocols, integration into galactic society. Everything will change." Scarred was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, Runner translating. "Change comes whether we choose it or not. Ships will come. Others will want to study us, teach us, guide us. But we have learned something important. We learned it from you." "What's that?" David asked. "That we do not have to become like others to be valued. We are hunters, predators. This is our nature. But nature does not prevent wisdom, does not prevent compassion. You showed us that prey and predator can be more than enemies, can be allies, friends. This is the lesson we will carry forward." Runner pressed against David's leg. The juvenile had been his constant companion for months now. The bond between them had deepened into something that transcended species, not ownership, not even simple friendship, something closer to family. "You should know," Petra said quietly. "The Council is debating something. They've realized there might be other predator species out there. Intelligent ones that have been overlooked because of galactic bias. They're talking about sending investigation teams, and they want humans to lead them. Because we can see what others can't, David said. Because you're the bridge, Scard said through Runner. Humans walked both paths, hunter and hunted, strong and vulnerable. You carry understanding that pure prey species cannot achieve. The galaxy needs this perspective. David looked around the cavern one last time, at the paintings spanning millennia, at the Riftclaws gathered to witness this moment, at Petra, whose species had spent millions of years running from creatures like this, now standing among them as a friend and colleague. They warned me not to touch the apex predator, David said, smiling. Said it was too dangerous, but the truth is I was never in control. From the moment I walked out to help Runner, the Riftclaws were the ones making decisions, testing me, teaching me, allowing me into their world. Scard made that sound again, the one that meant family. The other Riftclaws joined in, creating a harmony that filled the cavern. It was beautiful and terrifying and hopeful all at once. We should return, Runner said. Others will worry, and there is much work ahead, much to learn, much to share. They walked back through the mountains as the twin suns began to set. Behind them, the sacred cave held its secrets and stories. Ahead, the research station lights glowed in the gathering darkness. And above, the stars waited. The same stars the Riftclaws had watched for generations, wondering if anyone out there would understand them. Now they knew not everyone would. Fear ran deep, especially in species that had spent millions of years as prey. But some would understand. The humans, who carried both predator and prey in their evolutionary memory. And through that understanding, maybe the galaxy could become something more than it had been. A place where teeth and claws didn't automatically mean enemy, where different paths to intelligence could be celebrated rather than feared. David placed his hand on Runner's head as they walked. The young Riftclaw made a contented sound. 6 months ago, this would have seemed impossible. Now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The universe was full of surprises. Sometimes they had fangs. And sometimes, if you were brave enough and patient enough and wise enough to look past your fears, those surprises became friends, became family, became the key to understanding what it truly meant to be civilized. They said don't touch the apex predator, but David had learned the real lesson. The apex predator had chosen to touch him back, and that made all the difference.